it over to Aaron.
Hi, everyone. My name's Aaron Masliansky. I host a podcast called Inside the Skev, where I interview interesting people throughout Skokie and Evanston. And I'm delighted to have the opportunity to do another interview for JCC Chicago. Today, we are joined by Ashton Gleckman. And he, from his website, he's called The Boy with Bad Ears by Academy Award-winning composer Hans Zimmer. Ashton Gleckman is a 19-year-old filmmaker and composer from Carmel, Indiana. He's also founder of the Indianapolis-based production company Blackbird Pictures. So, Ashton, first question, how does it feel to be called the boy with bat ears?
First of all, thank you so much for having me. Second of all, Hans Zimmer, we first got in touch back in 2018, and he's my favorite composer personally. And I had made a video about his music, and we sort of got in touch through that, and I had the chance to go meet him. And he is honestly just one of the most humble, down-to-earth, relaxed guys I've ever met, and just a super inspiring guy. And so it means a lot to me the fact that he said that means a lot.
Yeah, he's an Academy Award-winning composer. It's amazing to be called that, especially so early on in your career. And by the way, I have to say, I've interviewed a lot of people over Zoom, and you have the most crisp audio that I can hear from anybody because of your equipment there. It's perfect.
It's good to hear.
Yes. So you've done quite a bit. I mean, you've had rock bands, you've written symphonies, you just produced music for Coldplay, and you've done these movies now. And I just watched the film We Shall Not Die Now, which is what we're here to talk about. And it's just incredible what you've done. How did you decide to do a movie about the Holocaust and the way in which you did it?
Right. Just a quick thing about that. I didn't produce music for Coldplay. I made a cover of a Coldplay song, which we were very grateful to receive good feedback from the Coldplay management team.
Okay.
They happened to hear it. But in regards to the film, so I grew up in a family that was always really open about telling things to their kids. And so I learned about the Holocaust when I was super, super young. And I remember vividly going to the Indianapolis Children's Museum. And they had this new exhibit about Anne Frank. And so I remember being 7 years old, going into the museum and hearing excerpts from her diary. And I think that when you're a young kid, the story of Anne Frank is a really good gateway into the story of the Holocaust because, she was young, I was young. It's a story that one could communicate and connect with when you're young. And at that point, I just became really fascinated with the subject. I saw Schindler's List shortly thereafter at the age of 7. I then went on to see, Boy in the Striped Pajamas and Defiance and all the other films as they came out, as well as going back to the sort of classics in the 70s and 80s. So it's always been a super strong part of my life. But a few years ago, I lost my great uncle, and I learned that he was one of the liberators of the Buchenwald concentration camp. Wow. And after learning that he was directly associated with World War II and with the Holocaust, I realized, you know what, I'm going to get one opportunity to make a film like this because, survivors, I think we lost something like 14,000 survivors in the past year. And wow. It's vital that we capture these stories because, in 15 years, 20 years, we might not have the opportunity to hear them directly. So for me, this movie was almost like a personal time capsule to listen to these stories, have the chance to meet with these people. And it's honestly taught me so much about the sort of resilience of the human spirit. Because these people who are in their 90s, some of them are 97, 98, one was 100 years old. They're such strong people and they have such a strong will and they've spent their whole lives dedicated to Holocaust education. So, yeah.
Are some of the people that you interviewed, did any of them pass away since you've interviewed them?
So one of the gentlemen that we had the chance to meet with very, very early on, we had the chance to speak with him in, I believe it was Pittsburgh, and he was a consultant on the film. His name was Sam, and he was a survivor of Auschwitz. And he passed away before we had the chance to come in with a full camera crew and do the interview. But he was such a strong part of the early stages of the movie. And we're looking to hopefully do something separate for his story because he has a very specific story that I think should be told as well.
Yeah. And you took a lot of new interviews, and then you spliced it together with parts of Shoah, the film Shoah. How did you come up with that idea and get that approved to be able to use that material?
Right. So whenever I can, I like to talk about this film, Shoah. Many of you guys who were around in the 70s and 80s have heard of this movie, but for newer generations, it sometimes isn't as talked about. But Shoah is a 9.5-hour documentary film which chronicles the Holocaust. And the director of the movie, Claude Lanzmann, spent over 10 years interviewing people from all around the world. And for the film, he captured over 200 hours of footage. And obviously, he brought all that down to 9.5 hours. But the film is sort of beyond description. Like, you can't really describe what it's like to see the movie until you've really seen it. It's just it meditates on death. It's just a deep dive into the despair of this period in history. And he does such an incredible job interviewing people from all perspectives, whether it's perpetrators of the crimes, actual Nazi guards at the camps. He interviewed survivors. He interviewed families of survivors. So when I went into this film, I knew that there was over 100 hours of footage that were still in the archives that hadn't been used. And I got in touch with the United States Holocaust Museum, and they were actually very, very open to us looking at the material. And then I got in touch with Claude Lanzmann's daughter, and she sort of gave us her blessing to be able to use the footage in the movie. So we incorporate that into it.
Well, I think what's so wonderful about it is that you're able to capture the stories of people who may not be with us anymore. And also, it must have been interesting for you to hear these interviews of people when they were more, in their 40s and 50s or so, as opposed to interviewing people who are in their 80s or 90s, who you did for the film. I mean, do you think that the answers that people gave you were different based on like what you saw the old footage versus speaking with somebody who is so advanced in their age?
Right. I mean, one of the things with Shoah is, for example, there's no survivors of the Treblinka or Sobibor death camps. And in the film Shoah, there's a multitude of survivors of those camps that are still alive and actually indeed still very young. There's also historians that aren't around today, such as Raoul Hilberg, who wrote a 1,000-page book all about the Holocaust called The Destruction of the European Jews. So Shoah is, in every sense of the word, a time capsule that delivers information to us that we would never have otherwise if Lanzmann wouldn't have made the film. So for me, being able to see survivors in their 40s or in their 50s, it's incredible. I think the most impactful story for me in Shoah was a man by the name of Simon Srebnik, who survived a camp called Helmno. And Helmno was sort of located near the ghetto of Lutz, but that camp used gas fans. And he was a little boy at the time when he was in the camp. And the film, Shoah, starts out with him riding in a canoe along the river where he used to sing songs for the German soldiers. And, he relays all of his memories. But it's definitely a surreal experience to see the film. And we wanted to bring a little bit of that into We Shall Not Die Now.
Yeah. When you interviewed some of the survivors, though, do you think that your age impacted how they answered? Do you think that they actually were more willing to share with you because they're able to pass it on 3-4 generations from where they are?
I don't know if I can objectively answer that. I think you'd have to ask them. But I know for me, it didn't feel different, or it felt very natural. They're super accessible people. And I think the thing that makes survivors, and especially like the ones that I spoke to, but all survivors, so incredible, is they have this openness about them. They realize that their stories, which are so filled with tragedy, have the ability to perhaps translate into hope for future generations. And so for me, they were always completely open. There were definitely points where they got to stories that were very difficult for them to relay and think about. Because, when you're in an interview and you're speaking with these survivors, sometimes for 2 or 3 hours, they're putting themselves back into their minds when they were 12, 13 years old in Auschwitz. So it's really important for these interviews, take your time, tread lightly and let them sort of develop on their own. But I think that in terms of age, I don't think that played a role at all. I think some of them were definitely surprised at how young I was. I think they thought I was going to be older, and I sort of showed up. And I still remember Frank Grunwald, who survived 5 concentration camps. He finished the interview, and he was like, how old are you again? I'm like, oh, I'm 18. And he was just like, he was a little bit dumbfounded. But I think the thing, by the way, that I've loved about this experience is, for example, Frank is now a really dear friend of mine, and we get together all the time for coffee. We do school speaking events together. I sort of helped him get his own event started in the Indianapolis JCC, where he's going to be playing some music that he used to sing in Auschwitz as sort of a remembrance event. So the connections that I've formed with the survivors have sort of carried along to now.
Oh, that's amazing. And you also went to Poland and filmed there as well. How was that experience for you? Because, for just to take it back for one sec, you saw these films, Schindler's List, when you were 7. Now, I have a 7-year-old and I have a 10-year-old, and my parents will tell you who are watching. I'm very honest with them. They ask me a question, I give them the information. And, I don't try to be overly graphic by any means if there's like a serious question, but I don't want to give them the falsehood in order to just make it easier on them. But I get some flack about that. But I think that it's important to know the truth. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I think transparency is really important. And I think the fact that my parents were really open about it when I was young, telling me exactly how it was, helped me a lot, just in terms of not only about the Holocaust, but just in terms of things around us in life. I think being transparent with your kids is really important. And that's part of what we're trying to do with this film, is just make a film that's really accessible, that one who doesn't know a lot about the Holocaust can watch. And it takes you from the events from beginning to end, showing you the story through a lot of different perspectives. But I think it's super important, and Holocaust education right now is more important than ever, because as I said, losing 14,000 survivors in 1 year, we really have to preserve these stories. We have to work as hard as we can to keep the stories alive. We have a multitude of Holocaust educators around the country who are doing that. So I think we just need to keep cheering them on and keep up the good work in terms of letting future generations know about this period.
Yeah. And when you went to those places in Europe to film, did you get any pushback from any of the locals?
Yeah. So Poland, I didn't get any pushback from the locals. But when I decided to go to Poland, I was 18 at the time, and I realized I didn't want to go with a big crew. I didn't want to go with an assistant camera operator. I didn't want to go with my parents. I needed to go by myself, because the story of the Holocaust has been with me since I was 7. And I needed to actually go to these places by myself because I wanted it to be a personal experience. And I knew that that was the best way for me to capture the footage for the film, is to just let it be a personal experience. So, it's one thing reading about Auschwitz or reading about the Warsaw Ghetto or reading about Treblinka, but actually being there. And many of the times when I was at the camps, for example, Treblinka, where over 900,000 people were killed, there was nobody else there. It was me in the middle of the woods at this memorial with my camera, and that's it. So you can just sort of hear, the sounds of the wind, and it's just still there. Whatever energy, it's still there. And I think that the fact that I went alone hopefully helped the movie and just giving it that extra sense of personal touch.
It totally did. And what your film did was it really walked you through the before, when Hitler was coming to power and laying the pretext for it, and talking about how, it's a process. And then, to go through to the systematic murder of 6 million Jews and many others, and how they got more efficient at it, and how each death camp was more and more efficient, really is sharp and to the point. But I think it's important for people to know what the thought process was behind it and why the history happened like that. I'm sure that was part of what your thought process was, right?
Right. I think the most important thing in terms of when you're researching the Holocaust and you're going through the books, and, for this film, I had the chance to go to the U.S. Holocaust Museum and look through, documents going back to 1945, actual German documents. I was going through diary entries that were written during the period. And I think it's really important to realize that the Holocaust did not happen overnight, just as other genocides or other sort of macabre periods in history they didn't happen in one day. They happened over time, and they happened because we let somebody rise to power, and then we let them take that power, abuse it, invert it, and turn it on its side. When Hitler was rising to power, he was seen as this sort of all-star figure, and people were loving his economic policies, but he used that power for all-time bad versus all-time good. And I think that's really the message that we can learn from this, is that we need to stay vigilant. We need to stay aware. We need to constantly look at what's happening around us, not sit by and watch it happen, but just sort of realize that it's happening. And if you have a voice, which I hope that we all do have a voice, express that voice and let people know your thoughts about it, because that's the only way that change could be made.
Do you think that the world has done a good job in preventing mass genocide since the Holocaust? Because there's definitely been things that have happened since then where millions have been killed, similarly to what happened in the 40s.
You're incredibly right. If you look at the Rwandan genocide, if you look at what happened in Cambodia, if you look at what's happening right now as we speak in Syria and what's been happening over the past 10 years there, this is why I made the film. This is why there's still films about the Holocaust being made. I've heard from a few people, why did you make another Holocaust film? Why is there another Holocaust film being made? And this is why. If you turn on the news, you'll see why. Because it seems like we don't learn our lessons. And so we need to keep talking about it, and we need to keep remembering it. When I was speaking to Dr. Michael Berenbaum, who's one of the most preeminent scholars of the Holocaust, he said, my all-time goal in my life, if I can be 90 years old, my all-time goal is to be irrelevant. My all-time goal is for somebody at that period to look back and say, look at how stupid those people were for doing something like that. But he's not irrelevant, because stuff like that is happening right now. And I'm afraid it's going to be happening for as long as I can imagine. All that we can do is try our best to diminish it and to try to fight against it. Because the Holocaust happened for so long because people were going along with it. People were watching the trains roll by, the Polish countrysides. People were watching stuff happen. And that's how these kinds of things happen,
Well, I mean, it was such a massive logistical program that they had to get the Jews to the death camps. And by the way, I did notice how you called everything a death camp, not a concentration camp. And that's another way of getting the point across. But
right. I mean, there's actually a difference, though. I mean, the concentration camps were camps where the Germans were sort of profiting off the output of the camp. So, for example, Dachau, Buchenwald, all the camps in Germany, prisoners were forced to work under deadly circumstances. Many of them died from the work. But death camps like Treblinka or Auschwitz or Sobibor, Auschwitz had a partially concentration camp section, but these were camps designed solely for the purpose of mass murder. They were engineered. Every building, every ramp was designed for the most efficient method. So death camps and concentration camps were sort of two separate entities in regards to the Holocaust.
Okay. Yeah, but I mean, it's just the logistical process that they went through, and they prioritized over everything to kill Jews. And it's just so incredibly horrible how everyone just stood aside and let it happen. If you were, let's say, the president of the United States or the head of the UN or something like that, what would you do from your perspective to stop genocide?
That's by far the most difficult question I've been asked probably in my life, and probably throughout the whole press thing for this movie. Wow. I guess the idea for me has always been coming together. I think coming together is the most important thing, because I think the more people you have behind a certain movement, the more power it has to override evil. When you think about World War II and how many people died during the Second World War, the reason why we won is because forces from all around the world, whether that's the United Kingdom, whether that's America, whether that's Australia, everybody came together to defeat one enemy. So I think that the whole key with the UN or anything in terms of not defeating genocide, because that is seemingly impossible given the history of mankind,
Right.
But diminishing it to the point where it does not cause something like the Holocaust again, that's something that we can do. and we've made an effort to do over the past 75 years since the Holocaust, but it has happened again, and this kind of evil has reared its head. But I think that the idea is education and unification.
Mm-hmm. I like that. I mean, and your movie is just a great way to get that out. And storytelling is the way in which you personally are using your voice to be able to eliminate that and diminish it. Are you creating more films, and have you done other films about the Holocaust to continue to spread the story?
It's definitely a period in history where I'm going to make more stuff about it. Right now, I'm working on a different project and a different documentary film, but there's so many more stories that I think really should be told in regards to this specific period. So I'm going to come back around and make more things about it in the future.
What are some of the things that you're working on now, by the way?
So I haven't really talked about it publicly, but I'll gladly talk about it. The documentary I'm working on right now is called The Hills I Call Home, and it actually discusses modern day Appalachia. So the whole film is set in a small town in eastern Kentucky, and we're sort of discussing the sort of community, the values, the struggles of living in a small rural town in the eastern sort of United States. And you know, these people alike have been subject to a lot of stereotypes. And so I think this film, similarly in terms of, you know, Jewish representation with this film is really just about exploring the stereotypes and understanding the truth behind a group of people without running to conclusions.
How did you get the idea to make something like this?
I saw sort of many articles and I got curious because the region of Appalachia, you know, spans throughout Western Virginia or West Virginia, throughout Virginia, you know, Tennessee, Kentucky. And to get into the region, it's only 4 hours away from where I live now. And so I got curious. I went out and I arrived in this town called Beattyville, which is home to 1,200 people. And I sort of walked through the front door of the town hall, and there's the mayor. And we sat down and talked for 4 hours, and he just told me about his town and the history of this town. And he introduced me to the people around the town. And I realized that these ideas that you get in your head because of movies like Deliverance, right, with the banjo lick, it's just so much more complicated than that. It's so much more three-dimensional. And I think that the whole idea of a documentary or of a film should be to sort of introduce people and bring them into new ways of life so that we can understand each other better. And that's where this film came up.
Yeah, that's the key. I think you hit on it. We have to understand each other. And I think when you don't understand each other and you start to hate each other is when you breed that hate. So I think that it's you know, pretty incredible that you're able to do that. Do you see yourself doing, you know, for your film career, do you see yourself doing mainly documentaries, or do you see yourself writing scripts and acting, or what is your thought process on that?
Well, first of all, I'm no James Dean or Marlon Brando, so I wouldn't expect to see me in front of the camera.
You never know.
You never know. That's right. I might be like Alfred Hitchcock and cameo myself in the movies, maybe. You never know. Right now, though, I'm focusing on documentaries just because I think that it's sort of a mixture of a lot of the things I like to do. I love editing films. I love shooting them. I love being outside with real people. In documentaries, you're with real people. And it sort of gives you a reason to go out into the world and sort of explore and meet people. And it's technically challenging, but at the same time, it's incredibly rewarding once you have a final product that you can share with people and a sort of story to tell and deliver to the masses. So documentaries for me are sort of my love right now, but I definitely see myself going into narrative filmmaking in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when did you do your first film? I mean, did anyone show you what to do, or did you work for anyone?
Right. So this was We Shall Not Die Now was my first movie. And the question is, you asked like, how did I learn how to make
Yeah. How'd you learn how to do it?
Trial and error. One of my favorite filmmakers, Quentin Tarantino, he said, you know, the best way to learn is to get out there, do it, fail, and learn from your failures. And so I went out and I made a bunch of short films. Some of them are okay. Some of them are really not good. And I learned from the failures and the successes. I took online master classes with people like Martin Scorsese and Ron Howard and Ken Burns. Ken Burns is my favorite documentary filmmaker. So I
Yeah,
sort of just did all those things, and was very grateful to have some help from people that I knew, and then went off by myself and went into the field and just started. I think the thing about a film is it's such a long thing to make a movie, but really you just have to start. You have to click the record button and get out there. And that's what I did with this one.
How long did it take you to make?
I started in March of 2019 and I finished in September of 2019. So it was really only 8 or 9 months, I think.
That's really fast, actually.
It was a little bit fast, but I think for me, I like to do stuff quickly because when I'm in the mood of something or when I'm, investigating a story, I like to go from subject to subject. And so for this film, I was literally flying from airport to airport, speaking with survivors. I would go to Florida and speak with Ben Ferenz, and then I would go to Las Vegas, and then I went to Poland for a couple weeks. So for me, that just helps a lot with sort of getting into the subject.
One of the things is that you have the time. The fact that you are young is an asset. You don't have to worry about like kids and stuff like that. And you're not in college. You graduated high school. Do you think that people overvalue college for going into film? I mean, I know a lot of people go and get degrees in it, and you get a lot of good practical experience, and you have people who can give you advice and whatnot. But you, I mean, my God, like you skipped some steps here.
Well, I think it's really different for everybody. College is really important for some people, and for a lot of people in the arts, it's not necessarily as important. I can say personally, when I was doing a lot of work in Los Angeles, I never really got asked for a college diploma or anything like that. I think a lot of people have a better time learning in a sort of classroom environment. For me, I like learning by reading books. I like going onto the field and just, again, learning from successes and failures. And for me, I just wanted to put money into making films versus the incredible amount of money that it takes to go to a film school is amazing. I mean,
yeah,
$60,000 a year for something like USC, it's incredible. So for me, learning by myself was the easiest way, and that's what I ended up doing. But I feel like just because one does something doesn't mean that that's what everybody should do. I think everyone has their own path, and definitely depending on what you want to go into for your future, college is sometimes more important than other times.
Right. But you enjoy education. I mean, I was watching some of your YouTube videos where you're teaching people how to create a score. And you've got like, I don't know, 100 tracks, and you're showing people how to put things together, and you're teaching masters. And you're probably, you're 19 when you're doing that. So you're not like everybody else, let's be honest. But I mean, how did you learn how to do that? I mean, it's just like putting together these scores for films. Like it's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, the whole entire YouTube channel, I've spent 4 years making YouTube videos because when I was starting out writing music for movies, there wasn't a lot of online platforms where I could learn. It was a lot of just like knowing a friend that knew how to do it and learning from them. So what I wanted to do is just give out the stuff that I've sort of learned over the past few years and put it into these YouTube videos. And so I give out all of my project files for free so people can download it and actually see it on their computer. I make the videos accessible for free because I think that if there's some kid out there who's 14 or 15 like I was back then and is wanting to learn how to write music, maybe they'll see the video, maybe they'll click on it, and maybe they'll write something awesome that I'll like one day. So if I can put it out there, I do.
Well, you're putting good out there in the world. I imagine you've built quite a big network, right?
Yeah. I think there's so many people, amazingly talented people around the world that are doing this stuff. And so, for example, I started something called the Global Composers Network, which is now made up of over 7,000 community members from around the world. And these are all just people who write music, who are part of Facebook groups, who sort of help to educate each other and help each other if they have problems and share their music with each other to get feedback. So I think that community is really important, and especially in the world we're living in now where we have stuff like Zoom or like Skype, it's never been more easy.
Yeah, no, I think it's key, and it's never been as easy to network with people around the world. I do it all the time too. But you're in Indiana right now, right?
I am. Indianapolis.
So, I mean, has COVID really affected what you're doing if you're still able to do everything from where you're talking right now?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think COVID has affected everybody. I think it's, I recently saw an interview with Ken Burns, and Ken Burns in his films have explored pretty much every single substantial event in American history,
Yeah.
from the American Civil War to the, World War II to the, and he said something really incredible, which is I think that this pandemic is going to be on the same level in terms of its importance as something like the as the Second World War in terms of how we remember it in history, because nothing like this has happened for a lot of people, even who might be 80 or 90. This is sort of unprecedented. And I think it's going to be a really important period in history. Um, it's affected everybody that I know, for example, and I think everyone who works in the entertainment industry, who is used to going out on set, used to shaking people's hands, used to going to parties with executives, who is used to, it's changed all of that. And especially for people writing music for films, if there aren't films being made, it's a lot more difficult to get jobs writing music for movies.
Yeah, of
So I
course.
think it's been really interesting, but maybe it will be subject for a documentary in a couple of years or so.
I think you should make it. It would be
Netflix,
great.
ring me up.
Yeah, no, no kidding. I mean, I think that would be really helpful. I mean, do you think though that the way that films are going to be put out to the public is forever changed?
Um, no, I think it's changed now. I think we're going to get back to the movie theaters. I think we're going to continue the cinema experience. I think it's going to change in the next few years, just simply given the economy of the whole situation. For example, the film industry has lost billions of dollars at this point. You can imagine films like Mulan and James Bond 25 who have been pushed back, and the studios have just lost so much money, and productions have been shut down, release schedules have changed. Studios and movie theaters are now in a lot of fights because of this whole situation. So I think we're going to see a change in the next year or so, just as we sort of go back to normal, hopefully once we find a cure for this virus. But after that, I think we're going to get back to our normal sort of cinema going experience. I don't think there's ever going to be a day where movie theaters are void, whether it's the 1950s or 1960s or 2015, going to the movie theaters is just a great experience. When the lights go off, the movie goes on. I don't think that's going away anytime soon.
Yeah, there's something about it. I mean, it's a fun experience. I like, it's different than just putting it on your TV for sure. I like that we have drive-in movies, at least in some areas. I think
Of
that will
course.
hopefully be a way for people to get some of that entertainment
Yeah.
this summer.
Yeah.
Hopefully just this summer.
Reminds me of all those restaurants in the 50s where you would sort of bring your car in and park, and they'd bring the
Yes.
food out on roller skates, that kind of thing.
I was talking about that with my family yesterday. It's true. I mean, it's
Right.
back to the 50s in many ways of how our lives are going because of this.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it definitely affects everybody, and I hope that you're right that we're back in the theaters, because that is the way to really experience a film. But you're doing filmmaking, you're creating scores. Is there one that you like more than the other that you're going to focus on?
Well, I've focused on scores for the past like 6 or 7 years now. I did a little bit of studying in New York and in Vienna, and I worked on a few films, and I've sort of tried to go into documentaries as a sort of full-time thing for now, just so I can focus on it and hopefully get a little bit better at it. But I sort of see myself doing both at the same time. So I wrote the music for this movie, for example, alongside a friend from Austria, and I'm going to also be writing the music for the film I'm working on right now. So I'm sort of doing them both in parallel, but I've sort of been trying to focus myself on documentaries just so I can continue to learn about it.
So when you say you wrote the music with your friend in Austria, did your friend, you each wrote something and put it together on the computer and then you combine it? Were you ever actually together when you were writing it?
Right. So yeah, when you're writing a score for a film, for example, this movie is, an hour and 45 minutes. And so you have the full film, and me and Michael over like Skype will literally go in, watch the film together, and decide, okay, we're going to have a piece of music from minute 2 up through minute 4.5. We're going to have another piece of music from minute 5. So we will do what we call spot the movie. And so we'll figure out where music will go. And then we'll split up all of these pieces of music. So he'll write, 15 cues, I'll write 15 cues. And then we had an incredible composer by the name of Benjamin Wallfish, who did the It films and Blade Runner 2049. He wrote the main theme for the movie. So we took that theme and sort of incorporated it in different styles around the film and helped to develop that. So that's sort of the process of it.
It's really incredible, how you're able to put that all together. Um, and I mean, while you're doing that though, were you also doing for other films at the same time? Does it get confusing?
I try to stick to one project at a time, just because I think it can get a little confusing when you're doing a lot of things at once, especially when you're like really investing yourself in one story or one project. It definitely helps to like focus yourself in.
Absolutely. You also came out with a director's cut, and you have an educational cut for the film. Have you seen other movies do this? I know director's cut, yes, but like an educational version. And I haven't watched the other versions yet. I just watched the main film. But what are some of the differences between them?
Right. Well, the educational cut is simply because class periods are really short and teachers like a shorter film so that you can have time for a Q&A discussion or something like that. So for example, when we show the film at high schools, me and Frank will go to these events and we'll watch the film, the 1 hour version of the movie, and then we'll have time for children to ask Frank questions about his experiences. So the 1 hour cut is really just a matter of accessibility and making the film easier to watch for younger audiences. And most films like this, I know, have an educational cut. For example, there was a documentary made last year about Eva Kaur, who is another survivor here from Indianapolis, who sadly passed away last year. There was a film made about her that's been very successful, and they made a 1 hour version, which has also been used for education. So for this film, I just wanted to have something like that, where you could really easily send it off as a package. We sort of have a worksheet that kids could fill out. And then the director's cut was something a bit different. I had a lot of scenes, because when you're making a movie, you have literally dozens of hours of footage. I had probably something like 25 hours of material for interviews. And so I had a lot of stuff on the cutting room floor that I had to cut out of the original theatrical cut. And I just thought, you know what, you're probably not going to get a chance to go back to this film sometime in the future. While you have everything available and while you have all of your hard drives accessible and all your footage, why don't you just make a longer cut of the film that's sort of that is everything you wanted to go in the film.
Mm-hmm.
So I sort of just took all of those scenes, all of those snippets, and I put it together in one director's cut. But I think that the theatrical cut for me is sort of the really tight version of the movie that I like to share with people, because that's sort of the film that we premiered at film festivals. That's the film that we've shown around the country at various JCCs and events. And I think that that is a really tight version of the film. But if somebody sees that version and wants to sort of dive into the story more and hear from more survivors and more snippets from Shoah, that's the director's cut. So it depends on what you're looking for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you mentioned that you went around to a lot of JCCs. How are you doing a lot of these types of interviews right now in order to be able to promote the film, or what was it like beforehand?
Right. We did a lot of these kinds of interviews like in December and January. But then I sort of went full-fledged into my new film, and I actually just got back from a few weeks of filming, and I'm going out all of June to Eastern Kentucky to film the main portion of my next documentary. So I've sort of been on this next project, but I definitely love what people have done using virtual meetings and stuff like that. I've been listening to a lot of my favorite musicians and composers who are doing concerts from their homes. So it's super cool that people are sort of adapting to the circumstances. And yeah.
It's intimate.
Yeah.
So when you're going to go out there and you're going to start filming, are you concerned about COVID, or are people going to be wearing masks when you're interviewing them, or what do you think?
So our production are very cautious about these things, and we actually delayed production for 3 months on this film. So we were going to film in this town, Beattyville. Again, it's 1,200 people there. And we figured, you know what, we don't want, because we're trying to tell a story about these people, and we don't want COVID dictating that story. We want things to sort of neutral out. And they've had over 350 tests, and they've had 0 cases over the span of around 4 to 5 months. So we are sort of, we've been given the go ahead by the mayor, and we're going in, and things should hopefully be good. I think that things are starting to settle down a bit, which is good.
Are they worried about you and your crew coming?
I don't think so. I don't think so. again, like we stay safe on set. Like we aren't hugging each other all the time. Like
Yeah.
we're pretty good.
When do you think you're going to go back to LA and talk to people and schmooze with all the bigwigs?
I don't know. I try to go to LA every now and then. I went to LA for the Los Angeles premiere of this movie back in December, and that was actually when we premiered the director's cut. So we watched through the director's cut, and Michael Barenbaum was there. And I try to go every now and then just to meet some of my friends. But given the circumstances right now, it's probably not the best time to go to LA or New York. So I'm just gonna chill out in Indianapolis for now.
You're in a good spot.
Yeah.
So what do you want to leave everybody with? Where should they find you? And, where do you see your career being in, 10 years or so?
That question is so hard. I don't know what the next 10 years are going to be like. But I think if there's like one message from this film that I hope people have, is that as sad as this period is, there's still so much hope coming out of this. And that's why I ended the film with the march. All of these kids, coming together at Auschwitz with the survivors marching to remember, because I think that we really have the opportunity to take these stories and translate them into hope and affect the world in a positive way using the memories of the past. And so I hope that people will take these messages that the survivors have, and as the survivors numbers are dwindling, we really have to continue to listen to the stories and educate. And, I think that that's really the way that we can continue on their legacy and continue to hopefully make the world a sort of better place for people.
It's our mission. Well, Ashton, thank you so much. It's an incredible opportunity to speak with you. I know I'm going to be seeing a lot from you in the future, but thank you for your time today. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And we'll look forward to seeing what you got in store.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Take care, everyone.
See ya.